Hey everybody, I want to in the previous video I talked a little bit about the idea of question, effect, value, and policy speeches. I apologize for before I had the projector on and so forth, so you probably couldn't see my face as well. And I really didn't need the whiteboard for question, effect, value, policy speeches, because really the focus is on the idea of arguments. However, I want to focus on the idea of problem solution speeches, which is the second persuasion speech that you're going to do. When we're talking about those kind of persuasion speeches, again, a lot of those components, what specifically they are, different kinds of ways of doing them, certainly can be found in the different video and audio lectures that I've already recorded for you, and you can find a lot of those information. This specific video is to really talk about the components that I think should go into the actual speech itself. So one of the things that we talk about that we've already covered in this semester is the idea that problem solution is actually a form of different speeches. So remember those different kinds of organizational patterns that we looked at? We talked about categorical, we talked about chronological, we talked about spatial. Problem solution was one of those organizational patterns. It's also a type of type of speech as well with regard to persuasion. I think problem solution speeches are one of the best ways that people can actually engage in persuasion, because there are all kinds of different problems that we have, and so forth. So when you're thinking about different kinds of problem solution speeches, you can think of very, very small things like parking on campus, or you can think of larger societal issues like Social Security. Now the problem with those larger societal problems is that how do you really describe those in 5 to 7 minutes? The key to that is you want to narrow your topic and maybe focus on one specific aspect of, say, a problem solution speech. So if you want to do something on recycling, maybe you focus not on recycling, but you focus on, say, electronic recycling. You know, how we throw out all kinds of electronic waste every year, cell phones, computers, televisions, and so forth, that really just take up a whole bunch of room in our landfills. And so that's what the key to a lot of problem solution speeches. Again, a lot of this stuff is narrowing your topic to a specific kind of idea and then proposing things and moving forward. So when we're talking about problem solution speeches are typically a 2-point speech, not a 3-point speech. Now you can make them into a 3-point speech if you wanted to make it a problem cause solution speech. But because we don't have enough time, really, because 5 to 7 minutes doesn't really give you a lot of time to go into the depths of the causes per se, I usually just say that it's okay to do a 2-point speech. So, and usually you want to have balance between both the problem and the solution, and then I'll explain that in just a second. So when we're talking about the problem, one of the things that you want to do, and this is where you have to kind of narrow your focus, is you want to describe what specifically the problem is. Sometimes you have to define that problem. You know, for example, if you are discussing something that you or myself or your classmates are not familiar with, then it's important to actually define what you're really talking about. So for example, I gave you that example of electronic recycling. Not a lot of people know that electronic recycling actually causes a huge amount of environmental damage, particularly in a variety of ecosystems out in the western part of the United States. Various kinds of groundwater have been polluted because of it. You've had people have actually died from the mercury that has been leached into the groundwater and so forth, all because we can't figure out a way to recycle our electronic waste. Because usually when we think of recycling, we think of plastic, and we think of cans, and we think of aluminum metals, but they're all different types of recycling. So taking a unique angle on something like that might require you to define it a little bit more. Be specific as to what you're talking about. When you're talking about the problem, if you're going to talk about something very, very familiar to us, like if you're going to do something like obesity in America, and as you can tell, I could lose some pounds with regard to the idea of the obesity crisis in the United States. But one of the things you want to focus on is, if you're going to do something that's fairly common, like drunk driving is a common speech that I hear all the time. You can do it, but I would like to hear you, again, something that's a little bit more unique. You know, if you're going to do something like driving and so forth, texting and driving is something that's become more popular, and I've seen in different kinds of speeches. What you want to do is you want to not only define what it is, what's the scope of the problem, but talk about either its causes or its effects. So for example, if you're talking about the idea of the obesity crisis in America, we don't necessarily really need to talk about the causes per se, because we know a lot of those causes already. We know that it's perhaps part of it is the inactivity of children, part of it is certainly genetic, part of it is certainly the foods that we eat. Really focus on those effects. Quantify those effects. How many people, say, perhaps are passing away? How many people are suffering from chronic illness? How many people are go to the hospital? How much money does this cost us? All kinds of different effects. If you're talking about something that's a little bit obscure, like that electronic recycling idea I was talking about those causes and embedding them with effects can be a really, really effective way of covering that aspect. But you should try to actually do this in about 2 to 2.5 minutes, because again, you only have 5 to 7 minutes when we're talking about your speech. Probably no more than 3 minutes. And the reason why I say that is because what a lot of students do is they focus on the problem, but they don't spend as much time on the solutions. And while we have it up here at problem solution speech, there is no one single solution to any single problem. There is no silver bullet. It isn't going to work, because every time we create one solution, we often create more kinds of problems that go with it. So what I like to do is I like to tell students that they need to have more than one solution to the problem. And solutions can exist at 3 different levels. You do not have to have a solution for each level. You can actually have 2 solutions, say at the governmental level, 2 solutions at the societal level, an individual solution, whatever it might be. Okay? You can have multiple solutions that you can put forward, but you should probably put more than one, because again, one solution is not going to just solve the problem. Okay? So again, there's governmental solutions. One governmental solution could be passing a law. A societal or organizational solution could be the organization, say, of a charity, or where we go out and we organize some kind of fundraising event. Could, if you're trying to raise money for cancer or something of like that nature. And at the individual level, individual is what specifically you can do in order to be part of the solution. So, for example, I had a student a few years ago who did a speech on the situation in Tibet in China. She was really, really passionate about Tibet and so forth. And she actually created her own website that had a variety of materials on it that could inform people more about the situation, how they could potentially get involved, and so forth. And really, that is the key with these kinds of solutions. I don't want you just to list solutions and be done with it. It's important that you concretize what you're talking about. So, for example, if you're going to do a governmental solution, if you're going to say, let's say you're going to do texting and driving, and you argue that we need to have greater penalties for those who engage in texting and driving because it's just as dangerous as drunk driving and other issues. So let's say you propose that we increase the penalties. So what you might want to do is, it's not enough to just say we need to pass a law in Massachusetts in order to increase the penalties. What you need to probably do is also offer an example of something of where that has actually occurred. There are probably plenty of examples of other states that have been much more harsh or lenient, depending on what specifically you're talking about, on that particular issue. So if you're saying, I propose that we pass a new law, for example, in the state, and I'm making this up, so I don't know if this is true. In the state of New Hampshire, if you are caught texting and driving, you have to go to jail for 1 year and you're pay a $10,000 fine. Those kinds of penalties are what we need in Massachusetts, and we need to copy the New Hampshire law in order to stop the plague of texting and driving and so forth. Okay? In other words, it's important that you cite and concretize and extend your examples. Don't just list things. Listing things does nothing. One of the things that often you'll find in these problem solution speeches, a common speech, is reducing stress. Okay, right? Stress is extremely harmful to your health. We all suffer stress, especially if you're trying to juggle classes and children and a family and a whole host of other things. And one of the things that people will do is they'll list, well, maybe you should engage in yoga, meditation, and all these kinds of, exercise. I don't want you to just provide a list of 10 different items and be done with it. If you're going to provide something, an individual solution, tell us specifically how we can do that. How can we specifically meditate 5 minutes a day? What does that entail? What do you mean by meditate? What do you mean by going out and run? Do you mean joining a specific gym? Give us something that we can hang our hats on. And that's really what I want you to emphasize in your solutions. That's why you don't need to list a whole bunch of these. I want you to focus on 2 or 3 of them. Again, if you want to do solutions at all 3 levels, you're more than welcome to do so. If you only want to focus on the individual level, because there are some problems that are better served at that individual level, especially if you're talking about wanting to make your neighborhood a safer place or something of that nature. Can really government handle that, or society? Probably not. Maybe organizationally it could. But you want to focus on those individual solutions. But when you're doing so, you want to articulate a particular solution, but then provide an example of where it's been done, say, in other places. And if you can't do that, then you probably shouldn't do that solution. You have to concretize for them. It's not enough to just list those solutions. All right? So that's why I want you to have balance between your problem and your solution. Okay? Try to have some balance when we're talking about it. And what I mean by balance is in terms of the amount of time that you spend on each one. It's not enough just to list your solutions. It's important that you actually flesh those things out so we can take action on those specific kinds of on those solutions to your specific problem. Okay? If you have any specific questions about that, right, please contact me as soon as you can. Again, this is for your second persuasion speech, and I think if you follow these steps by adding depth to the problem and adding different kinds of levels of solutions, your speeches will be, wonderful, and I look forward to listening to all of them. Again, focus on perhaps a unique aspect of a problem, and then offer multiple solutions that are concretized and have specific examples to back up your specific solution as to what you're proposing. Good luck.